Hello and welcome to another Tabletop Ramblings Middle-earth strategy battle game tournament review. In this video, we're going to be looking at my 800-point army list for Scouring of Cheshire. We're going to be overviewing the weekend and how my battles got on, and more generally, the weekend itself, and finding out how this list does. On Saturday the 19th and Sunday the 20th of March, it is the Scouring of Cheshire 2022. This is a mammoth 800 points event. There's scheduled to be well over 100 players, and it is going to be immense. And this is the 800 point Mordor list that I will be taking with me. So before we get stuck into the weekend, let's have a look at this army. It's a slightly amended list that I've taken before. There's a few extra will on the Witch King compared to other times I've run this, and I've downgraded Goroth, that big burly two-hander, into Grishnak. It's done okay at a 700 point variation, but this time at 800, it's in its full glory with the Mouth of Sauron riding with it. So this list is the Witch King on Fell Beast with 3 might, 18 will, and 3 fate. He's got his shiny hat of power, the Crown of Morgul, riding that Fell Beast. And he is leading this warband down here, which is 5 Black Númenóreans, 5 Morannons with spear and shield, a tracker to lead the way, and a Black Númenórean banner. Chosen to give the banner to a Black Númenórean rather than a Morannon with spear. They are the same points, because while he won't be able to spear support, he does cause terror, and also being tempted to use him as a spear support often puts him in much more danger. The other 2 warbands here and here are identical warbands. They are led by Grishnak at the front, Gorbag at the back, both with shields. And in their warbands, they have 5 Black Númenóreans, 6 Morannons with spear and shield, that extra one to support the hero, and then a Wargrider with shield and throwing spear. These warbands are just the mainstay of the army. They are there just to generally be a pain for anyone. They're fairly hard to shift with their terror. They've got fight 4 on the front, and they also benefit from being quite high courage as well at the front. With the army bonus in play and no negative modifiers, those Black Númenóreans ramp all the way up to courage 5. Finally, we have the Mouth of Sauron. He is leading 4 trackers and just a lone Wargrider with shield. He is very much a support warband. He's also quite useful as just a single drop there with a very limited number of models that can redeploy quite easily, or at least shoot from distance, so that in deployment I can be slightly cagey on where I'm going to go and respond to the enemy's deployment. He's also got that all-important march, and he's a backup caster. The Witch King, as amazing as he is, once he gets stuck into combat, does benefit from a friend being able to transfix the inevitably powerful people that he's pounced on and been unable to quite flash kill in one turn. As we've already mentioned, the strength of this army is in its troops. It's got that fight 4 terror at the front, with that surprisingly high courage for Mordor, all the way up to a possible courage 5 at the front. And then, while only strength 3, those Black Númenóreans are backed up by strength 4 Morannons for quite a tough and also quite deadly front line. The 5 trackers are there not really to do any shooting, although they can if there's opportunity, but mainly they are there just to pump the breakpoint up. The total model count is 45, so it's got quite a high breakpoint, and in a timed match, it is quite unlikely to break. Not through any form of slow play, but just from the fact that it's quite large and quite tough to break through. We've then also as well got the Witch King, providing that hero shutting down power, that big threat, and the mobility that his Fell Beast gives him. So it's got quite a lot of different tricks. It's quite standard for Mordor. It's not really exciting, but it's fairly solid in its troops and its minor heroes, with the tactical flexibility, that Swiss Army knife that the Witch King can provide. So with that overview of the army list, we'll get it boxed up and we'll get everything ready and packed away to whip off to the Scouring of Cheshire. Arriving at Scouring of Cheshire, the first thing that hits you are these amazing boards, these ultra-realistic scenic boards that at least 50% of the games are played on, possibly slightly less. Each year there are more and more of these boards, and they do look stunning. There's just a couple of these different board pictures coming up on the screen now. This Survivors of Lake Town one is one that I've played on last year. This ultra-realistic water, I did have to touch it just to see if it was real. Obviously it's not, but it looks it. There are absolutely loads of these. Didn't particularly count how many of the boards there were, but there must have been at least 20, 25, 30 or so of these really detailed scenic pieces, with then the rest of them being the mats with terrain on, which still look fantastic in their own right, although overshadowed by these beautiful, beautiful boards. This one here, Osgiliath, with the water running through. Really, really fantastic. A really immersive experience playing at this event. I'm a big fan of little bits of detail as well, so I really like this particular touch here with the little pigs in the pen. Perfect to fight over. And then we have this image of a really impressive diorama hosting a Helm Hammerhand Legendary Legion, and this was to be my first army that I would be facing, viewed here on this amazing diorama that really puts my, or if you can even call it a display board, to shame. Game 1 is Assassination, same as Game 1 last year, which was a 0-0 draw. Spoilers if you've not seen that review. So this year I'm thinking that I am going to be a little bit more aggressive. I set up right on the 24-inch line rather, as deployment permits, and he has deployed in this nice, fairly safe bubble. His deployment reflects the fact that he has 14 bows, 5 of whom are the Outriders with that shoot 3, and once I get a little bit closer, there's a whole host of throwing spears as well. So he's content to hang back a bit and shoot me to pieces. I, in the movement phase, hustle everything forward. I've got the mouth on the left-hand side. As you can see, he can only really be targeted by 1 or 2 guys, and they'd have a couple of in the ways. He's there just in case I want to call a march and break forward. But the other thing you can see in this picture is the Witch King has pulled someone into him with a compel. He's charged forward, and he is getting ready for a game-winning or game-losing move right off the bat. Assassination is all about killing your target, and my target is a captain that you can see just to the right of my opponent's arm. He's boxed in so he can't be pulled out, but there is room enough for the Witch King's base to fit in. I've only measured this by eye at this point, not measured it with a ruler. I didn't want to give anything away. Although his captain at fight 4 is less than the Witch King, he can't strike. There wasn't much he could do about it. So the Witch King calls his heroic move, heroic combat rather, and it goes off. He goes in on that captain, ends up having to burn another might. So he's down to just 1 might. He's behind enemy lines, but he has killed the captain in the ensuing combat phase. Which means, as he's my target, while the Witch King's not my assassin, that was, I believe, Gorbag, chosen simply because it was either going to be Gorbag or Grishnak. Neither of them would ever do the deed. He is now dead for 5 points. Now, even if the Witch King dies, a leader kill is only 3. So I'm still ahead on victory points. At which point, I figure my army can fairly comfortably go toe-to-toe with his for the remaining hour and 30 minutes that we had of the round, and I will win. You can see here, though, that actually luck was even more on my side, where the Witch King, who's off his base, because he's just a nightmare and he keeps falling off, he managed to win the move roll off with his last point of might and escape. So not only did he go in and kill the target for 5 victory points, but escaped with his life as well. He's out on a limb, but not dead, which is an absolute miracle. And here you can see the clock, only 25 minutes in, and those victory points achieved. Now, the next image is the wrong way around, but I've kept it in because it was awesome. He rode up a Royal Guard into 8 inches of my throwing spear Warg Rider and said that he would be able to kill my Warg Rider. And jokingly, I said, no, my Warg Rider's got priority. He's going to throw and he's going to kill, even though he's moved and hitting on 6s. And that is exactly what he did. He hit on a 6, and once he'd rolled up or down, he then rolled another 6 to kill the rider before the Royal Guard could kill him. This next image marks the start of a bit of a misplay from my opponent, who moved his cavalry and a captain and a couple of those infantry models to one side of his main force. His main force is up at the top of this photo that we can't quite see, splitting them off, which gave me the option for a bit of a denied flank later on. However, we move into one of my mistakes, which was not keeping the Witch King safe. I threw him in to my main line instead of behind. My Witch King is on the charge against that Royal Guard, but it's now his move, and he's got a captain, which isn't actually in this photo. He'd been removed for some reason, I think because he fell over, and then when he was put back, I realised there was a captain there, which was a shame, but the captain is lower fight, and there was a banner there, so it was touch and go. I was slightly worried, though, that the Witch King was going to get flash killed here, although, to be fair, he did deserve to die, as he'd kind of given his life earlier on for those VPs, so it was only fair if he died here. In the remaining move for my opponent, he threw everything forward, charged the Witch King with loads of bodies, including that captain, but fortunately, the Witch King, with the fight value, won the fight. And he had the fight value because Helm, who you can see with the loom band, is miles away. He was transfixed by the mouth, and then the Witch King black darted his horse from under him, and because he rolled a 1 on the Throne Rider chart, he ended up prone. And Expert Rider is active, so because he was transfixed, he couldn't do anything about it, which is one of those things that never ever comes up, but is worth bearing in mind that that Expert Rider is active. Something I didn't really know. It was pointed out by my very sporting opponent. But that meant that the fight value buff from Helm was out of range of the Royal Guard, so there was no fight 5 in that fight. The Witch King won, and he flash killed the other captain, leaving just one captain and Helm left on the board for the forces of good. Then my opponent made a game-losing mistake here. At the time, it didn't seem that important, but on reflection, he agreed that this was the turning point for him. With hindsight, at least. Because at this point, he withdrew his army to volley at me with his throwing spears, which so far had done fairly little. And as well, his cavalry retreated out of 12 so that I couldn't move towards them and then heroic move onto them. This meant, though, that I was able to just deny the flank for his cavalry. I moved round and away towards his infantry and miles away from his cavalry, meaning that a captain and his royal guard, those big heavy hitters, were out of the fight for ages. And the reason that we agreed this was a mistake is because in the ensuing few turns, his army ripped my Mordor lads a new one. Helm dismounted, still carved up a couple of guys. I managed to box him out, but the rest of his guys, all with piercing striking at the front, were just brutal. Really, really hammered my line, which opened up Gorbag and Grishnak close to the front line, either one of which could have been the target and could have lost me the game. Here, his cavalry have finally got in, and they really hurt. They carved up a little section there with a heroic combat. Fortunately, I had enough bodies to stop Gorbag and Grishnak, and even the mouth, from getting tagged. That was the final turn, and because those cavalry were just a little bit slow to the fight, I was able to hold on to the 5 victory points for killing his captain. My target, his target rather, was, I believe, Grishnak, and he was still alive, unwounded, and neither leaders were harmed. Neither of us were broken. I was very close. He, not so close, although if it had gone on indefinitely, we probably both would have broken. Meant that was a 5-0 victory to Mordor. Keeping the lava theme from the first game, the second battle was to take place on this beautiful Mount Doom themed board. This board was perfectly themed for my own army and also fit in well with the lava-loving Balrog that my opponent had brought in the depths of Moria Legendary Legion. A whole host of goblins, the big bad Balrog itself, and 2 captains. The scenario is capture and control. Those 5 objectives set out in a cross or a diamond, and they are tagged. They start off neutral, but then you tap them, turn them to your colour, and they are yours until they are reclaimed. The lines clash together immediately, and battle was fought. As you can see, the lines all along have been engaged. The mouth has moved around so that he's out of a hurl from the Balrog, and he has cast Transfix on the troll, and it's not gone off. The Witch King has also cast a Transfix on the troll, and it's not gone off. This is a recurring theme of the game. This troll was pretty much magic resistant. No spell managed to go through. Very few, at least. That is particularly unfortunate, as you can see here, the troll is ready to line up a hurl on the Witch King. The Goblin Captain, who's in that mass on the right there, called a move, and his lads, who were fearless within 12 of the Balrog, tied down the Witch King. The troll, who passed a courage test on Courage 2 with the negative buff from the Witch King, lined up a perfect hurl. Fortunately, was able to counter, pull a couple of guys off, and a successful heroic combat later saw the Witch King escape to safety. Meanwhile, the Balrog munched his way through my line, successfully heroic combating through 2 into another 2 and killing them. However, on the left, my line fairly slaughtered the goblins, winning most fights, even with the banner reroll. I don't think that banner, board-wide drum banner, won any fights. It was very unlucky, but my guys with the superior fight value, fight 4, even with the Balrog's buff bringing them to 3, the fight 4 on the Black Númenóreans was high enough that they won the fight. Even when goblins did occasionally win, wounding on 6s couldn't quite get through, but I was wounding on 5s with the Black Númenóreans, with the Morannons rather, and that really did start to take its toll. Over the next turn or two, the goblin line was in tatters on the left, and on the right it wasn't faring too well either. Here my Witch King is off camera, but he has gone after that top objective, and the drummers have relocated there to tag it, so the Witch King is going to have a field day. The Balrog, I think here, probably makes a mistake chasing after the Witch King. The Witch King is blocked off by a couple of guys, and I've made sure that the Balrog can't reach him. I did underestimate the Balrog having that 2-up flame burst type thing that he's got to clear the path a bit, but still the Witch King was safe, and the Witch King never got into combat with the Balrog. The Balrog, however, did abandon that central objective and allowed me to gain quite full board control, although his force was withering very, very quickly, so realistically there wasn't a massive amount that he could have done. The rapid slaughter of the goblins on the left was actually in part due to my own mistake, because I looked at the clock and thought, there's only 3 minutes left, I might as well burn all my might and go nuts on heroic combats, only to realise that it was an hour and 3 minutes remaining. We'd had a very quick, rapid, brutal game, and I had completely underestimated how much time had lapsed, even looking directly at the clock. And so I was in a strange position of having done too much work too quickly, and this game only ends on a 1 or 2 after one force is broken. The Balrog was reduced to pretty much a quartered force, but can't break until it's been wounded 5 times, which with my list was never ever going to happen. Fortunately, over the next 20 minutes or so, I was able to slaughter everything on the left, fully claiming that half of the board, including the centre, the top and bottom objective. So I had 4 objectives. The Balrog, who had been running around causing mayhem, was boxed out at this point and would have had to commit and abandon the other objective to secure any others. That meant that with about half an hour to go, we were in this position here. The Balrog had run onto the right-hand objective to sit on it with his 3 remaining warriors. Everything else had been slaughtered. I was about 3 or 4 off break. I lined up well out of his whip range, and basically it was a standoff. If he came at me to break me, which would have only net him 1 victory point, he would have lost that objective, gaining me an extra 2, so it would have been 10-1. Or if he stayed there, I had 8, and it was an 8-0. And so 8-2 rather, sorry, because he was, of course, sat on an objective. So he decided to stand there on the objective and say, come at me. And I stood outside of 8 and said, come at me. And so with half an hour to go, we decided that instead of rolling priority and neither of us moving, we would call the game there, shook hands, and it was a really, really fun game that ended 8-2. The next game, the final game of day 1, was Divide and Conquer, which I still have nightmares about last scouring this exact scenario against a siege engine, and it annihilated me. And lo and behold, we have a siege engine, the dreaded Mordor catapult with that troll, giving it reroll to scatter and all those horrible things that is going to squash my army to pieces. In this scenario, you have to deploy half your force in one quarter, with the other half in the diagonal corner, and the enemy does the same. And then there are those 3 objectives in the middle, the very central one worth the most victory points and the outer ones worth less. And so at this point, I've already decided I've lost this game. I hatch a little plan, so my deployment is putting the Mouth of Sauron with his march with the Witch King together, and turn 1, I unleash that pair upon the catapult. So turn 1, everything just advances on the centre. I've tried to split my forces a little bit. I'm reluctant to have the full formation with just 2 or 3 guys as scatter targets, because if he gets the dead on, which he may well do with might and with the reroll on the troll, he'll squash my whole army. So I'm not really sure how best to play it. Everything's spread. It's not too great. But you can just see at the top of the screen, the Witch King, Mouth and a Warg Rider have gone straight for the catapult. On a march, the Witch King, moving 17 inches, is inside 12 of the catapult, so he can't be targeted, which is the only thing that I worry about in this game. I'm already fairly confident that I'm going to lose. I just want to destroy that catapult and stop the Witch King getting one shot by it. The Witch King, Mouth and Warg Rider are well into combat here on turn 2. The Witch King did try and compel someone to charge him on turn 1. He was affected by a march, so he couldn't charge, but he parked up in 3 of an orc and compelled him forward, but the orc wouldn't budge. The Witch King rolled something like a 1-1 and a 2, and then another 1 on the re-roll with his crown on that compel. But inside of 12, he wasn't too worried. Then, charging into combat, the Witch King completely fluffed it against a transfixed Goroth and failed to win the fight. He'd have had to burn all his might to do it, just not worth it. Over in the rest of the battlefield, my force are tentatively moving toward the centre on the left, but aware that he's got a Wraith, Gothmog and all sorts of horrible scary things, so I'm keeping my distance from them. I've already given up on the left-hand objective, which has the Wraith and a host of orcs on it. I'll never clear those with my few guys and no hero. So I'm moving towards the centre. Gorbag, Grishnak are teaming up to take the left, at which point they will swing onto the centre, is the grand plan. The Troll has been compelled away from the Witch King, but also away from the catapult, which means there's no reroll to scatter. However, it does still squash a fair few of my guys. In the first turn, it managed to squash 3 or 4 that I'd bunched together fairly foolishly. But on the second turn, at least, I was able to scatter it onto just a lonely spearman who got squashed by that big, heavy, strength 10 hit. Here we're on turn 3, and you may notice that Goroth is finally dead. He took about 5 wounds. There was no way he was going to pull enough orcs in front of him. He was splattered there, leaving the Warg Rider open to destroy the catapult, because the troll was again transfixed. However, at this point, I kind of realised that the reason no one had come to help out the catapult, there was Guritz and a band of orcs that had abandoned it to run off to the objective, was because, of course, objectives are worth victory points and catapults are not. So the Witch King and co needed to turn their attention to the centre. As for the rest of the battlefield, my orcs have engaged on the right-hand side, abandoned the left, although my archers are there advancing half just to shoot at them, trying to at least make the enemy believe that I'm going for the second, the left, while I moved some forces to try and just barricade the centre to buy some time for the Witch King and friends to get there. The right-hand side was going quite well for me. I'd fully surrounded this blob. I'd got Gorbag onto Guritz and friend, so that Gorbag had the extra attack and fight value for being outnumbered. But then, as you can see, I'm pointing to that Warg Rider. Now, his catapult has my Warg Rider on it, ready to destroy it. But in its final act, it fired and it got a natural 6 to scatter. And so it hit that Warg Rider and the entire set of combats got squashed. Everything got hit. Fair few of mine took hits and died, Also, so did some of his. But, importantly, Guritz took a wound, failed his fate, and then the spearman backing up Gorbag, who didn't get clipped, managed to kill the prone Guritz. So it was an awesome shot and very entertaining, and probably what I would have done. Although I might have considered using severed heads, which would have had less of an effect on his troops. But it was incredibly entertaining. All the fights getting squashed, but losing Guritz was a blow on that right flank for him. And then the catapult was destroyed and that big threat was gone. Although, of course, now without the catapult, the troll is free to charge towards the battle. So, a bit of a mixed bag. The next couple of turns saw me secure the right completely, wiping out those few prone orcs, and managing to get on the centre with enough numbers to hold it, and importantly, with a transfix on Gothmog, the enemy leader, Grishnak was able to charge in and strike while the Witch King came in to finish him off. The centre and the right were then in my control, and then ultimately the left crumbled as well, with courage tests failing. Even though he had a Wraith, he did a 5 will Black Dart and ended up wiping out his own Wraith. The fire had gone a little bit from my opponent, and he was happy to ultimately effectively concede the game, really. It certainly would have been a victory, but perhaps with that spark gone, he conceded more victory points than he may otherwise have done. Although being broken, the game was still going to end on a 1 or 2, and my forces were ready to come in and annihilate on the other flank. I then moved on to that left just before the end, as the game refused to end. We kept rolling too high for the game to end and wiped out the remaining guys on the flank, securing the objective for a 12-0 win. So as the final game of the day draws to a close, it's time to have a chat with Legolas and Gimli in the shop and have a mooch around the store at Element Games. Loads and loads of products. They've got a really well-stocked shop there, well worth checking out. And then on into the evening, there's a quiz, there's pizza for those that have bought into it, and it's a chance to chat with fellow hobbyists, reconnect with people that we've met before, and just generally have a really nice chilled evening, ready for the following day. Then the following day, bright and early, we have game 4, the first day on the Sunday, and I'm against a great guy. Played against him a good couple of times, and he has brought his fiefdoms. He's here to put me in my place after I stole the title at another event from him. So the scenario is Contest of Champions, which is all about leader kills. So it's how many can Imrahil kill compared to the Witch King. Now, Imrahil is a killing beast. He's a little bit vulnerable to magic, although if the Witch King's getting stuck into combat, then he is going to be struggling to cast. So a lot of it is going to come down to the mouth. It could be a better matchup, but equally it could be a worse matchup. And most importantly, a great game set up with a great opponent. The board that we're playing on has that really realistic water feature that I tested out on the first day to see if it actually was water. It does look incredible. But it would have made this very, very difficult if we actually treated it as water. So we decided to just ignore the feature completely and play on it as though it was open ground, because otherwise, first turn, Imrahil may have just drowned in the water and it would have been ridiculous. So we decided to ignore the water, and we also moved the centre of the battle just 6 inches across to the right, because otherwise he wouldn't have been able to form any form of wall with that difficult tilted terrain, and it would have just made things a bit messy. So we decided just to slightly tweak where the battlefield was to make it fair for both sides. Didn't want to give either of us a headache for this kind of game. So turn 1 priority, fortunately, went to him. And so he charged in against me, allowing me to wrap round and also respond with the Witch King, who got a heroic combat off, getting 2 kills and then pulling back to safety. And importantly, black darting Imrahil's horse, so that on that first initial charge, he was on the floor and unable to make strikes in that first turn for a 2-0 lead on kills early game. This was one of those real thinking, headache-inducing games, so I've not got a massive amount of photos. Not that either of us was being particularly over-gamey or anything like that, but just with all the different components of the fiefdom's army, remembering what everything can do and a lot of tactical placement, it was a real hard-fought scrap. The Witch King managed to get up to 4 kills, Imrahil on 3 when the big turning point came. The fiefdoms are broken. My force is fairly close to break, but not quite there. Probably another 6 or 7 at this point. And as you can see, there's a loom band on Duinir and on Imrahil. Imrahil has been transfixed. Duinir is prone. And that is heartbreaking, because I've gone in with a might point and the banner into Duinir and won the fight on a brace of 6s, smashed him to the ground. I'll get an extra might point back if I kill this model, and on 8 dice, needing 4s to wound, roll a couple of 3s, a couple of 2s, and mainly 1s. Just really rubbing it in that the reroll 1 army bonus only applies to warriors and not heroes. And this is the point at which history is repeating itself, and the end of the Witch King is all but guaranteed. It's going to come down to some move roll-offs and priority and things like that, but things are looking dire now for the Witch King. At this point, Duinir has now stood up, and that's because he has 1 point of might, as does the Witch King, and unfortunately, he has called a heroic move. I have priority, but elect not to waste that might on a move when I'm going to need it on a strike. So I decide that I will not call a move. I call a move instead with Gorbag or Grishnak over on the side, and do win the move roll-off, tying up the majority of his force, but not able to tag Duinir, who stands up and charges the Witch King, along with a whole lot of friends. And this is going to be a very scary round of combat. In the combat phase, the rest of my army rip the fiefdoms to bits on the left-hand side and the flank. He still got Forlong and whoever the other hero is, Angborn, in fact, they're still doing some work. Gorbag has properly not turned up, but Grishnak is making up for it. He's killed most turns, and the fiefdom's army is starting to look very, very thin now. However, the Witch King is the important fight. He's now out of might, but he's got the fight value, and he's got a banner reroll. So he's got 4 dice to win that fight. His normal 3 and the banner. But sadly, he loses the fight and takes enough wounds to strip him of all of his fate. This next turn is going to make or break the game. Due to the poor placement of my heroes, putting all of my might on the left-hand side, I have no one available to call the move on the right where the Witch King is. Neither does he, because he has also made that same mistake. Now that Duinir is out, he made less of a mistake, at least keeping doing here with Imrahil. But now he's out, it all comes down to priority, which sadly does not go Mordor's way, and Imrahil charges the Witch King with a whole host of friends. I did try and subtly bait my opponent into sending Imrahil into a warrior to kill a warrior, which would have made a tie on kills, negating any VPs for that. But he was broken and I was unbroken, so I would have won. But he was far too savvy for that. Charged into the Witch King. And, well, we'll watch live how he fares.
So we're just going to leave that as it is.
Yeah, go for it.
This one is...
That was the end of the game. The final fight of the game. Imrahil kills the Witch King, taking him up to 4 kills, the same as the Witch King. So we were even, no points there. But you get 3 if your leader kills the enemy leader, and it's only 2 for breaking unbroken. So it was a 3-2 victory to fiefdoms. And we both sat back and breathed a sigh of relief that the game was over, because it was so intense and tactical by the end. It was really on a knife edge. It was a really, really fun game. As you can see, at the very end of the game, the Witch King killed by Imrahil, but there are not many fiefdoms left. Mordor absolutely ripped them apart in that final turn. Their line had collapsed, and they really, really struggled. They were well on their way to getting quartered. Mordor was still 3 or 4 off break, although without the Witch King now, it would have ended fairly horribly. With hindsight, what I should have done is that turn before not rolled Fate on the Witch King. I should have allowed Duin here to kill the Witch King, which would have meant that there are no victory points for the Witch King's death. Because if any old person kills the leader, nothing happens. It's only leader on leader. That would have then meant that Imrahil would have needed to kill 2 enemy models while on foot, which is a bit of an ask, in order to beat the Witch King's kills. 1 would have got a draw on that, and then 2 would have got him the extra victory points, and I would have won if he'd either only got 1 kill or none, because I'd broken him. However, hindsight is 20/20, and the urge to keep your leader alive is very, very strong. So lesson learned, but in the heat of battle, it didn't happen. Then, after a spot of lunch, it was time to judge best painted. So, up now are a couple of photos of the various different armies that were on display. And there were some absolutely stunning entries. Loads and loads of these armies are absolutely beautiful. The work that goes into these does make my poor attempts at painting seem really unworthy. But looking at them all is really inspirational. There are loads of really great armies. During this time, I was chatting with various people, so I didn't manage to get photos of all of them. So if you went to this event and your army's not featured, it's not because it didn't look great, it's just because I didn't quite get a chance. There are lots of stunning armies. These Easterlings are from the Entmoot podcast. I've not actually got anyone's specific permission to use anyone's name, so I've kept all the names out of it, but you may well recognise some that have cropped up on Facebook, and there's some various identifying things, such as the Mordor catapult there with the out of the frying pan podcast little symbol there. But all in all, these armies, they are stunning, and there are lots of really impressive display boards. The Easterling Carned display board coming up here won Best Painted, and it's no surprise really. The display board as well as the models are both absolutely exceptional. Took a good couple of shots here. Obviously didn't know this was the winner at the time, but it really does stand out quite well. The detail on the display board is fantastic, and obviously the models as well.
Strip of paper at the front,
Little overview video running across it. I was so impressed. I took more photos of this than any other. What also comes through is the great variety in different armies. From that purple scheme Balrog to Rohan to these Mordor lists. There's a lot of different variety in these lists and different themes even within similar lists like different Mordor lists. And then another one of my particular favourites was this chariot army, which looks absolutely beautiful and almost as impressive as the models, this beautifully calligraphied list. And then we have the ultimate tournament winner, spoilers, this list here. This is the Pits of Dol Guldur, that new legendary legion, which is as beautifully painted as it is deadly. The bases on this are particularly nice with all the different little bits of leaves on the bottom. Then finally, it's display board heaven with various different amazing boards. This Army of the Dead board was stunning. Another really nice, subtle display board there. And then this mountain of dwarves. Another shot here of it rising up with the tournament in the background. And then finally, the Don't Follow the Lights board, showcasing a very visually intriguing and interesting Mordor force, particularly fond of those Dead Marsh bases. After casting my vote for Best Painted, then it was time for game number 5, and the scenario was Seize the Prize. First turn, I marched the mouth and everyone up, managing to get on the prize, but not digging it up in that first turn, because I wasn't quite sure whether he would come forward or stand and shoot. My Rivendell opponent did both. He sent forward his infantry with Elrond and Glorfindel, while his archers hung back to shoot. And those 2 6s you can see are the elves shooting into the Witch King past the trees, and then it was a wound on the Witch King rather than the beast for one of those arrows, which was a 6, followed by a 6 to deal a first turn wound to the Witch King. Fortunately, the Witch King returned the favour of 6s and passed his first fate without issue. Then, in the next turn, we rolled priority and I lost priority, but he used some of his foresight points to force me to win so that he could react to me rather than him coming forward and risking the fell beast doing its work. So I was able then to castle up on the objective and have Grishnak successfully pick it up. He's there hidden behind the Witch King. The Witch King, for his part, chucks a light transfix on Elrond, manages to get it off on a 6, I believe with just 1 dice, forcing Elrond to stay where he is. He doesn't want to waste his will on that. So his force advances just in front of mine, but not engaging. And Círdan pops his second spell. So he now has the ability to cause terror to everyone within 6 inches of him, and his whole line is fearless, which is fairly scary to face for Mordor. In the next turn, the Mouth of Sauron is passed to the objective so that Grishnak can get stuck in, with the mouth still being able to cast and being relatively safe. My plan at this point, with about an hour and 20 minutes to go, with the objective nicely castled behind my line, was just to survive, kill stuff and have fun. Only in the next 2 turns, my force started to crumble. Elrond using his wrath, the archers keeping the Witch King back, was quite deadly. I was hemorrhaging models. I believe once Elrond and Glorfindel got stuck in, at one point I'd lost 15 and he had lost 2 elves. So while I still had the objective, it was not looking too good. And this scenario ends when both forces are quartered. So if I run off with the objective and quarter, it doesn't end. And I knew that I was going to struggle to keep hold of this for the full amount of time. So I set up passing the objective to the Witch King, and the following turn, heroic marching with the Mouth's last point of might right off onto the left flank with the Witch King, and then the next turn he jumped off the board and managed to end the game. This is a panned out shot. You can see on the left the Witch King and the Mouth miles away from the scrap. The Mouth has been able to move 15 with that march, and the Witch King a massive 17, getting them right out of danger. There's now at this point nothing that can stop the Witch King flying off with the objective, because a heroic move roll off between Glorfindel and either Gorbag or Grishnak went my way, and that meant that a plucky orc was able to charge the terrifying Elven Lord and bog him down so far away from the Witch King that only a few arrows would be able to have any hope of bringing him down, but they missed their mark and the Witch King flew off. You can see in this final photo that my force has been ripped to pieces by these elves. Elrond, dismounted by a black dart, is still wrecking face. He is empowered here by enchanted blades from Círdan, and he guts Grishnak in the final turn. Glorfindel heroic combats off a random orc into Gorbag and guts him. My army was absolutely destroyed, but having that objective did get me the win. The objective off the enemy side is 7 victory points. I was broken for 3 to my opponent. Neither of the leaders were harmed, and so it was a 7-3 win to Mordor. Into the final game, and at this point, looking at the rankings, I'm actually sitting at 8th out of 120, so that's not too shabby, although losing this will jump me right down to probably about 40. Whereas winning could well put me within the top 10, which is a very respectable position. So there's a little bit of pressure, and this is definitely compounded when seeing the Iron Hills force that I'll be coming up against in this final game, especially as it's piloted by a very, very skilled opponent who describes himself very modestly as not a novice. The scenario is Hold Ground, which is all about the central objective. It's that token on the right-hand side near Dane and all those warriors. Needless to say, Dane and those warriors aren't on the board. They're just waiting to be deployed. The warriors on the left are on the board. He won first turn priority and brought in his goat riders on the middle of the north or south, whichever way you want to call it. And his infantry band came in behind him, leaving Dane and I believe a full 18-man warband off the table. My 2 infantry warbands came in either side of the Iron Hills force. I chose the placement of Gorbag very close to him, and he chose the placement of the other warband. Then the Mouth of Sauron came down along with the Witch King on that left-hand side, ready to hopefully sweep down and block off this body of Iron Hills from getting to the centre. And then all I had to do was worry about Dane, which of course is a massive worry, so sounds like a bit of an understatement. Next turn priority, I believe, went to me, and his captain called a heroic move, which I countered with Gorbag, who was right next to him. I also called a march with the Mouth of Sauron, just to bring the main body of my force in front of his force, close to the objective, if at all possible. This then was a heroic move roll-off, and it went to me, which was really, really important. We discussed it after the game as well. We both agreed this was a major win for Mordor because it allowed me to pin that band in place and allow Grishnak and his band to pincer and crush it from the other side as it was in the middle. If he'd won, I suspected, and he confirmed, what he would have done is denied that and charged Gorbag, leaving most of my army out of range, and he would have tried to crush Gorbag quickly. I still would have been able to move towards the objective, but it would definitely have done massive damage to me and mitigated most of the damage that I was then able to do to him. Here you can see my opponent doing his move, but realistically there's not much he can do here as his force is tied up, fully surrounded, waiting for Grishnak to come in. Importantly, I've managed to keep that captain that was on a goat, but now he's on the ground after rolling a 1 on his throne rider from having his goat black darted from under him the previous turn. So that is fairly brutal. And then once it's my normal movement after his heroic, it's then fairly dire. Half of my force charges into combat, bringing more pain to the beleaguered Iron Hills. And then the Witch King comes in, transfixing the prone Iron Hills goat riding captain, who's no longer on goat, and charges him. The reason I transfixed him was because you can Master of Battle something you can't normally call, which I clarified before making that mistake. So he would have been able to Master of Battle on a 5+ my strike against him because we were even fight. So just to seal the deal, I transfixed him with the Witch King and charged him in. Then the mouth activated, called his march, and with the remaining probably third of my army, marched close to the central objective and just making sure that if Dane were to come in behind, that I'd be relatively secure, at least for a turn before I'd be able to react, assuming he came in and I lost the ensuing priority. At the end of the turn, the Witch King, you can see there against that loom band prone captain and the rest of my army pulling forward. But then those 4 Iron Hill warriors at the top are part of that big Dane warband that are getting dropped down. I took this photo, at which point my opponent reminded me to wait for the money shots and not bother taking it while he was deploying his army, and then I promptly forgot to do that. So this is the best we've got, but it does showcase roughly where everything is. In the combat phase, the fully trapped and surrounded Iron Hills didn't really die. I think I probably killed 1 and lost a couple. It was not looking too good, but the Witch King did the work and killed that captain. So at the end of this turn, I had lost 3 and so had he, but one of the dead Iron Hills was that captain, which was a big blow for the Iron Hills. And on top of that, my positioning was quite strong, with Dane and his band coming in at the back behind my line to smash through it, as opposed to the other plan that my opponent contemplated, which was coming at the other side of the board and just running onto the objective, which we both agreed at the end would probably have been the more sound, if less entertaining, tactic. Next turn, priority went to me, and it was a heroic move roll-off. Grishnak right in the middle called the move for me, and neither his captain nor Dane were able to Master of Battle it, which was a recurring theme. I don't believe he got any in the whole game, which was a source of both comedy and frustration. But we both found it funny, although it was somewhat frustrating for him. The move went to Grishnak, another very game-changing moment. It allowed me to hold back his entire Dane warband with just 2 or 3 guys that charged multiple suicidal sacrificial lambs, but it did allow me to tie him back away from the centre and away from really being able to do anything for another turn. Dane resisted on a 6, a transfix, but he didn't call a heroic combat in the ensuing combat phase because in this photo there's still all the guys in the top right from my force blocked off by those dice still to move, including the Mouth of Sauron, because they weren't included in the heroic move from Grishnak, and they successfully blocked everything in and would have meant that Dane's heroic combat didn't really get him anywhere other than killing an extra few guys. Then, very crucially, after casting, I believe, another transfix, which probably failed on Dane, the Mouth and a few Black Númenóreans ran onto the centre. This was after double checking with my opponent exactly how he viewed the central objective working, whether having one person on that central objective counts as triple, as it's 000, or whether you need to have at least 3 models. Some people play it differently, so I wanted to double check. He said that he wanted it to be at least 3 models on there to get the full VPs, so we agreed that's how we'd play it. And so 3 Númenóreans ran towards the objective, along with the Mouth, who would be able to pop backwards and forwards between the objective and casting. Over the next few turns, the kills were fairly even, but Mordor were definitely starting to come off worse. Those trapped iron hills, right from the beginning, were just not dying. That banner withstood an almighty amount of abuse from heroes and the like. Fortunately, though, I managed to get a transfix to stick on Dane and threw the Witch King at him, assuming that, worst case, even if things didn't go very well, the longer I can hold back Dane and his force, the more likely I am to keep the central objective. With Dane transfixed, I was able to strike, knowing that Dane wouldn't be able to strike himself, although it did raise an interesting question as to Master of Battle, whether you can still Master of Battle a heroic while transfixed, as it is a passive ability. So, or in fact, it's just an ability, it's neither passive nor active. So, we didn't quite know how it would happen. We rolled the dice to see if it mattered, and fortunately he rolled a 1 on the Master of Battle. So it didn't matter and we didn't need to stress. But it does raise an interesting question, whether he would have been able to use Master of Battle to strike even while transfixed. As it was though, it didn't matter. The Witch King struck up and with quite a few friends won the fight, knocking Dane off Big Pig and dealing 5 wounds. This cost Dane all of his fate and 2 might, leaving him with one left, just to survive on 1 wound. Leaving him with 1 wound, 1 might, but no will or fate. And that was a very brutal round of combats. The next turn, priority went to good, so Grishnak called a heroic move. This was attempted to be countered by the surviving captain and Dane with Master of Battle, both of whom failed, and so Dane called a move with his last point of might and actually won a roll-off, which I couldn't begrudge him because I believe it was probably the first one that Good had won all game. This meant that Dane and 2 Iron Hills charged into the Witch King and trapped him. The Witch King did have a point of might left to strike, but he was still surrounded by some big heavy hitters. In my move, however, Grishnak moved so that all of his guys with him would be able to stay in range while surrounding the now dwindling force of Iron Hills that had been stuck in the middle, and importantly, taking those guys off the Witch King that had charged him, just to buy him some time. Although I did make a mistake here and charged 2 orcs, an orc and a spear support, into Dane, which pulled Dane off the Witch King as it was good priority, so he chose to keep Dane from fighting the Witch King. My plan was to strike and then barge. However, as my opponent reminded me, he's not a novice, and he knew that that would happen, so he chose the fights in an order that meant that Dane was able to back out of the option for the Witch King to be able to do this. He did take double strikes from the Morannons, but they were unable to get that all-important 6, which would have put him down. We then come to the final turn, and the Witch King has now moved to charge those 2 warriors. And that is because, with priority and a heroic move, unsurprisingly, with my opponent's luck going my way, the Witch King cast, I believe, something crazy like a 6-will Black Dart on Dane, because he had no will left, and because the Witch King still had loads left. He was on at least double figures. So I just threw it at him to see what would happen. And it went through, and on a 4+, rolling a 4, the absolute minimum, did kill Dane. And then, instead of going after his banner, which I'd been after all game out of spite, my opponent very sportingly reminded me that I should be going after the break and killing as many as possible. So I threw the Witch King into 2. Ultimately, it didn't matter. I was 3 away from breaking him. I was a fair number away from break, although it wasn't outside of the scope of possibility that I'd have broken if we'd have carried on playing. I think I was probably about 10 away, less than that. But the game timed out at this point. I had the objective and had managed to kill Dane. This, amazingly, was a 9-0 win for taking the objective with triple, uncontested, and also killing the enemy leader, which was an extra 2 VPs, so plus the 7 for the centre was a 9-0 victory. A very hard-fought game, and definitely afflicted by bad luck. The Iron Hills were just not quite able to break through the Mordor line. Really, really good fun, really entertaining game, and miraculously put me on 5 wins, 1 loss, which is my new personal best, so I was very pleased with that. And also, after waiting on a couple of late finishing rounds, one of which went on an agonising 25 minutes into overtime, the results came in, and by some miracle, I managed to come 3rd. So that brought me a podium position. As you can see from this shot of the rankings, the victory points between 3rd and 4th were very, very close. A 0.4 victory point difference between myself and the person who came 4th. Really, really close. That's the VPS that I've ringed there. And then the MOV, I did have to Google exactly what that was, but that is the VP difference, basically, in each game averaged out, which again was just 0.1 difference. Very, very close between 3rd and 4th, and also all the way down to 8th. There were a lot of people on 5 and 1. The VP difference very, very close. It was definitely as much down to how other people's games went in that final round as much as it was down to my final game that did manage to pop that onto the podium. In this shot, I have blanked out all identifiers and names, including 1st and 2nd, because of my own particular relationship with GDPR and the fact that this video has taken a phenomenal amount of time to edit because the iPad is playing up and I don't want to risk it getting taken down. But if you go to the event Facebook page, you'll be able to get onto the Longshanks page, which has got all these details, and you can see all of those lists. It's one of the really good things about Longshanks, which is the tournament system that's been used for this event. It means that you can see loads and loads of lists Mine actually on this isn't on there because I'm not technologically savvy enough to work out how to do it. But most other people are bright enough to have done that. You get to see all of the different lists, so you can see which lists are working for people and which are perhaps not. And so that brings my Scouring of Cheshire 2022 journey to a close with this absolutely beautiful trophy, along with a scroll rolled up, which is a certificate. You can see I've not yet unrolled that, ready to frame it to go forever in the man cave. I also need to create a man cave. It's been given over to a nursery, but truly beautiful prize there. The prizes for first, second and third were these amazing trophies in the appropriate bronze, silver and gold. And then there were most sporting, as well as the most well painted. That's obviously not what it's called. Best painted is how it's correctly pronounced, as well as a raffle with a whole raft of other amazing prizes. There will be another Scouring of Cheshire next year, which is going to be even bigger and even better from what I gather. There's going to be even more of those beautiful tables and lots more tables there for even more people to join in the fun. The weekend was an absolute blast. Cannot recommend this event enough. There are lots more happening at Element Games, run by Steve and the Top Table gang and all those at Element as well. They are well worth checking out. Do check out the Facebook page for Element Games and for Top Table Gaming as well. I'll pop both of those in the description below. So a massive thanks to everyone that helped run that event, everyone that went and made it such an awesome experience. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Please do like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell button if you haven't already. And again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.